the Comanche horse race, hooves that left no tracks. Before we start, just a reminder, if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel. Now let's get to the video. Atais from Texas, 1860. The photographer's journey. The dust of the Texas plains clung to everything, clothes, skin, camera equipment, as photographer Samuel Hartwell adjusted his heavy wooden tripod for what felt like the 100th time that scorching July morning. He had traveled 3 weeks from San Antonio, following rumors and whispered stories about a legendary Comanche horse race that occurred only once every 7 years, when the summer moon reached its fullest point. Samuel was no ordinary photographer. At 32, he had already documented the California Gold Rush, the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, and countless frontier settlements. But this assignment was different. The Harper's Weekly Commission had come with unusual urgency and an even more unusual request: documented the impossible horse race that frontier legends claimed defied the very laws of nature. Mr. Hartwell, called out his guide, a weathered frontiersman named Jake Morrison, who had lived among various tribes for over a decade. "They're coming." Samuel squinted against the harsh sunlight, adjusting his wide-brimmed hat as he peered across the vast expanse of prairie grass that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. At first, he saw nothing but the shimmering heat waves rising from the baked earth. Then, gradually, shapes began to emerge from the distance, riders approaching at incredible speed. The Comanche band had been surprisingly welcoming when Samuel and Jake had arrived at their temporary camp 3 days earlier. Chief Running Bear, a man whose weathered face spoke of countless battles and hard-won wisdom, had listened intently as Jake explained Samuel's purpose through a mixture of broken Comanche, Spanish, and elaborate hand gestures. "The white man wants to capture the spirit race with his magic box?" the chief had asked, gesturing toward Samuel's camera equipment with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "He wants to show his people the truth of what happens here," Jake had translated carefully, knowing that the wrong words could end their mission before it began. Chief Running Bear had studied Samuel for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to peer directly into the photographer's soul. Finally, he had nodded slowly. "The spirits will decide if his magic is strong enough to capture what should not be captured." Now, as the riders approached, Samuel felt a strange electricity in the air, as if the very atmosphere was charged with an energy he couldn't identify. The horses and their riders moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural, their forms wavering in the heat like mirages. "Get ready," Jake whispered urgently. "This only happens once, and if you miss it," Samuel didn't need to be told twice. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking his camera settings, ensuring the photographic plate was properly positioned, calculating the exposure time needed to capture fast-moving subjects in the brilliant Texas sunlight. The riders were closer now, and Samuel could make out individual details. 7 Comanche warriors, their faces painted with intricate designs in white, red, and black, rode bareback on horses that seemed to flow across the landscape like liquid lightning. Their long hair streamed behind them, and their expressions were intense, focused, as if they were participating in something far more significant than a simple race. Behind the approaching riders, Samuel could see a gathering of spectators, men, women, and children from the tribe, all dressed in their finest traditional clothing. Feathers, beadwork, and painted leather caught the sunlight, creating a kaleidoscope of colors against the golden prairie backdrop. But as the riders drew nearer, Samuel began to notice something that made his rational mind rebel against what his eyes were telling him. The horses seemed to be moving without quite touching the ground. It was subtle at first, perhaps just a trick of the light or the heat shimmer, but as they approached, the illusion became more pronounced. "Jake," Samuel called out, his voice tight with confusion, "are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Jake's weathered face had gone pale beneath his tan. "He told you this wasn't like any other race, Sam. The old-timers, they call it the spirit race for a reason. The lead riders, a young warrior with lightning bolts painted across his cheeks, was now close enough that Samuel could see the fierce concentration in his eyes. The horse beneath him, a magnificent painted stallion, appeared to be galloping through the air, its hooves striking at nothing, its mane flowing as if caught in a wind that touched nothing else. Samuel's photographer's instincts took over, overriding his rational mind's protests. Whatever was happening here, it needed to be documented. His finger found the shutter release, and he began the careful process of capturing what might be the most extraordinary photograph of his career. The riders thundered past, or rather, they flowed past, their horses' hooves making no sound on the hard-packed earth. Samuel worked frantically, changing plates, adjusting angles, trying to capture every aspect of the impossible scene unfolding before him. As the last rider passed his position, Samuel noticed something else that sent a chill down his spine, despite the oppressive heat. The tall prairie grass behind the racing horses showed clear signs of wind disturbance, bent and swaying as if a powerful gust had passed through. But the ground itself, the hard-packed earth that should have been churned up by dozens of pounding hooves, remained completely undisturbed. No tracks, no hoof prints, no sign that 7 horses carrying 7 riders had just passed over this spot at full gallop. Samuel stared at the ground, then at his camera, then back at the ground. His hands shook slightly as he prepared another photographic plate, knowing that he needed to document not just what had happened, but what hadn't happened, the complete absence of any physical evidence that the race had occurred. "Jake," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the cheering of the Comanche spectators, "what exactly did we just witness?" Jake Morrison, who had seen everything the frontier could offer, slowly shook his head. "Sam, I've heard the stories for years, but I never believed them. They say that once every 7 years, the spirits of the greatest Comanche horses return to race with the living. They say the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead becomes thin as smoke." Samuel looked back toward the finish line, where the riders were now dismounting, their horses pawing the ground and snorting as if they had just completed an ordinary race. But even from this distance, he could see that where the horses now stood, their hooves left clear impressions in the dust. "But why now?" Samuel asked. "Why did they let me photograph it?" Jake's expression grew thoughtful. "Maybe because they know their time is ending. The white man's world is closing in, Sam. The buffalo are nearly gone, the reservations are being drawn up, and the old ways are dying. Maybe they wanted someone to remember that there was magic in this land before it was all measured and mapped and fenced." As Samuel packed his equipment, his mind raced with the implications of what he had captured. If the photographs turned out as he hoped, they would show something that challenged everything the civilized world believed about the nature of reality. But would anyone believe them, or would they be dismissed as clever tricks, optical illusions, or outright fraud? The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The Comanche spectators were dispersing, returning to their daily activities as if they had just witnessed the most ordinary event in the world. Chief Running Bear approached Samuel and Jake as they prepared to leave. Through Jake's translation, he said, "The spirits have accepted your magic, white man. What you have captured today will speak of things that were and things that will be no more. Use this gift wisely." As they rode back toward their camp, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that he had been chosen for something far more significant than a simple photography assignment. The weight of the exposed plates in his saddlebags felt enormous, as if they contained not just images, but the very essence of a world that was rapidly disappearing. That night, as he lay in his bedroll, staring up at the vast Texas sky, Samuel wondered if he would have the courage to develop the photographs when he returned to civilization. Part of him feared what he might find, or worse, what he might not find, when the images emerged from the chemical baths of his darkroom. The stars above seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light, and somewhere in the distance, Samuel could swear he heard the faint sound of ghostly hoofbeats racing across the plains toward a finish line that existed somewhere between the world of the living and the realm of legend. 3 weeks later, in the cramped dark room, he had set up in the back of his San Antonio studio. Samuel Hartwell stood before the developing tray with trembling hands. The red glow of the safety lamp cast eerie shadows on the walls as he watched the first image slowly emerge from the chemical bath. What appeared on the photographic plate defeated every rational explanation he could conjure. The 7 Comanche riders were there, captured in perfect detail, their painted faces fierce with concentration, their hair streaming behind them, their bodies moving in perfect harmony with their mounts. The horses were magnificent, frozen in mid-gallop, their muscles taut with effort, their manes flowing like liquid silk in an invisible wind. But they were airborne, not jumping over an obstacle, not leaping across a ravine, simply galloping through empty air, their hooves striking at nothing, suspended above the ground as if gravity itself had released its hold on them. Samuel examined the image with a magnifying glass, looking for any sign of trickery, any indication that his equipment had malfunctioned or that the heat had somehow distorted the image. But the photograph was technically perfect. The exposure was correct, the focus sharp, the contrast excellent. Every detail was crisp and clear, including the detail that should have been impossible. He moved to the second plate, then the third. Each image told the same impossible story. In some photographs, the horses appeared to be galloping several feet above the ground. In others, they seemed to be skimming the surface, their hooves just barely clear of the earth. But in every single image, there was empty space between the horses' hooves and the ground. More disturbing still were the photographs he had taken of the ground after the race had passed. The prairie grass showed the clear signs of disturbance, bent and swirled as if a powerful wind had passed through. But the earth itself remained completely unmarked. No hoof prints, no churned soil, no sign that 7 horses had just thundered across the spot at full speed. Samuel set down his magnifying glass and rubbed his eyes. He had been a photographer for over a decade, had documented everything from mining operations to military campaigns, and had never encountered anything that challenged his understanding of reality so completely. A knock at his studio door interrupted his thoughts. Samuel quickly covered the developing photographs and made his way to the front of the building, where he found his assistant, young Tommy Fletcher, waiting with the morning mail. "Morning, Mr. Hartwell," Tommy said cheerfully. "Got a telegram here from that magazine in New York. They're mighty anxious to see what you captured out there with the Indians." Samuel took the telegram with hands that he hoped weren't visibly shaking. The message from Harper's Weekly was brief but urgent. Eagerly awaiting photographs of Comanche race. Deadline approaching. Wire immediately upon completion. "Tommy," Samuel said carefully, "what do you know about the Comanche horse races?" The young man's face lit up with interest. "Oh, you mean a spirit race? My granddaddy used to tell stories about that. Said he saw it once, back in 22. Claimed the horses ran on air itself, never touched the ground. Course, nobody ever believed him. Folks said the sun got to him, made him see things that weren't there." "What if they were there?" Samuel asked, quietly. "What if your grandfather saw exactly what he said he saw?" Tommy laughed. "Well, that'd be something, wouldn't it? But horses can't fly, Mr. Hartwell. Everybody knows." After Tommy left, Samuel returned to his dark room and stared at the impossible photographs. He had the evidence, clear, undeniable photographic proof of something that shouldn't exist. But what was he supposed to do with it? If he published the photographs as genuine, he would be branded a fraud or a madman. His reputation, built over years of honest documentation, would be destroyed overnight. But if he suppressed them, he would be denying the world evidence of something truly extraordinary. Samuel spent the next 2 days poring over the images, consulting every photography manual he owned, even writing to colleagues in other cities to ask about potential technical explanations for what he had captured. But every expert he consulted confirmed what he already knew. The photographs were technically perfect and showed exactly what they appeared to show. On the 3rd day, he received an unexpected visitor. Jake Morrison appeared at his studio door, his weathered face grave with concern. "Sam," Jake said, without preamble. "We need to talk about those pictures." Samuel led him into the studio, and after a moment's hesitation, showed him the developed photographs. Jake studied each image carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each play. "These are exactly what I saw," Jake said finally. "But Sam, you can't publish these." "Why not? They're the truth." "Because the truth ain't always something the world is ready for," Jake replied. "You publish these, and you'll have every snake oil salesman and carnival barker from here to New York claiming they can make horses fly. You'll have the army wanting to know how the Comanche developed this technology. You'll have scientists and reporters and curiosity seekers descending on what's left of the tribe like locusts." Samuel hadn't considered the broader implications of his discovery. "But if I don't publish them, who will believe that any of this ever happened?" "Maybe that's the point," Jake said thoughtfully. "Maybe some things are meant to remain mysteries. The Comanche have been keeping this secret for generations. Who are we to expose it to a world that will only try to exploit it or explain it away?" That evening, Samuel sat in his studio, surrounded by the impossible photographs, wrestling with the most difficult decision of his professional life. Outside, San Antonio was growing and changing, becoming more civilized and connected to the wider world with each passing day. The frontier was disappearing, and with it, the mysteries and magic that had once defined this land. It thought about Chief Running Bear's words, "What you have captured today will speak of things that were, and things that will be no more." Perhaps the chief had known that Samuel would face this dilemma. Perhaps he had counted on the photographer's conscience to protect the secret, even as he documented it. Samuel picked up his pen and began to write a letter to Harper's Weekly. "Gentlemen, I regret to inform you that the photographic expedition to document the Comanche horse race was unsuccessful. Due to technical difficulties with my equipment in the extreme heat, none of the images were properly exposed. I was able to observe the race, which was indeed extraordinary, but was unable to capture any usable photographs." He paused, his pen hovering over the paper. With a few strokes of ink, he could bury the most remarkable discovery of his career. But he could also protect something precious and irreplaceable from a world that might not understand its true value. As he continued writing, Samuel made a decision that would haunt and comfort him for the rest of his life. The photographs would remain his secret, hidden away in a place where they could preserve the mystery without exposing it to exploitation. But even as he wrote the letter, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that this decision was part of something larger, a test, perhaps, of whether the white man's world was ready to acknowledge that there were still mysteries in the universe that couldn't be measured, catalogued, or controlled. The photographs of the horses that left no tracks would remain hidden, waiting for a time when the world might be ready to believe in magic once again. 6 months after the impossible race, Samuel Hartwell had settled into an uneasy routine of keeping the most extraordinary secret of his life. He had constructed a hidden compartment behind the false wall of his darkroom, where the photographs lay wrapped in oiled cloth, protected from light and moisture, but never far from his thoughts. His official report to Harper's Weekly had been accepted without question, though the editors expressed disappointment at the technical failure. Samuel had even submitted a few conventional photographs of Comanche daily life that he had taken during his stay, which were published with modest success. To the outside world, his expedition had been routine, unremarkable, but the secret ate at him. Samuel found himself returning to the hidden compartment again and again, unwrapping the photographs to study them by lamplight, searching for details he might have missed, trying to understand what he had witnessed. Each viewing only confirmed what he already knew. The images were real, the horses had indeed galloped through empty air, and he possessed the only proof that such a thing was possible. The burden of this knowledge began to affect his work. Clients noticed that he seemed distracted during portrait sessions, that his usual enthusiasm for capturing the perfect shot had been replaced by a mechanical competence that lacked his former passion. Samuel found it increasingly difficult to care about documenting weddings and civic ceremonies when he had witnessed something that challenged the very foundations of reality. It was during this period of inner turmoil that Samuel received an unexpected letter. The envelope bore no return address, but the paper was of high quality, and the handwriting was educated and precise. Mr. Hardwell, I understand that you recently returned from an expedition to photograph certain activities among the Comanche people. You represent a group of individuals who have long been interested in documenting phenomena that exist beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. We would very much like to speak with you about your experience. If you are willing to meet, please place a white cloth in your studio window tomorrow evening. Someone will contact you within the week. Respectfully, a fellow seeker of truth. Samuel read the letter 3 times, his hands trembling slightly. Somehow, despite his careful secrecy, word of what he had witnessed had reached other ears. That evening, Samuel paced his studio for hours, the letter clutched in his hand. Finally, as the sun set over San Antonio, he tied a white handkerchief to the inside of his front window and waited. 4 days later, a woman appeared at his studio door. She was perhaps 40 years old, dressed in the practical clothing of a traveler, with intelligent gray eyes and prematurely silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. There was something about her bearing that suggested education and authority, though she introduced herself simply as Miss Catherine Aldrich. Mr. Hartwell, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. I believe you have something extraordinary to show me. Samuel studied carefully. I'm not sure what you mean, Miss Aldrich. My recent work has been quite ordinary. She smiled, and Samuel noticed that her eyes held a depth of knowledge that seemed far beyond her years. Miss Hartwell, I have spent the last 15 years traveling across this continent, documenting phenomena that most people would consider impossible. I have photographed objects moving without human touch in a house in Salem. I have recorded the voices of the dead speaking through mediums in New Orleans. I have witnessed healing that defied medical explanation in a small church in Kentucky. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. And I have heard whispers about a photographer who captured images of horses that ran on air itself, somewhere in the Texas plains. Samuel felt his carefully constructed facade crumbling. Who are you? I am a member of an organization that has existed for over a century, she replied. We call ourselves the custodians of the extraordinary. Our purpose is to document, preserve, and protect evidence of phenomena that exist beyond the boundaries of what the world considers possible. She reached into her traveling bag and withdrew a leather portfolio. Perhaps these will convince you that you are not alone in your experiences. Samuel opened the portfolio and gasped. Inside were dozens of photographs, each more impossible than the last. A woman floating several feet above her bed, surrounded by witnesses. A man whose shadow fell in the wrong direction, defying the position of the sun. A child whose reflection in a mirror showed her as an adult. These are all genuine? Samuel asked, his voice barely audible. Everyone, Miss Aldrich confirmed. Taken by photographers like yourself, people who stumbled upon the extraordinary and found themselves burdened with evidence that the world was not ready to accept. Samuel closed the portfolio and looked up at her. What do you want from me? I want you to join us, she said simply. I want you to share your burden with others who understand its weight. And I want you to help us preserve these mysteries for a future generation that might be more ready to accept them. That evening, Samuel found himself in the back room of a boarding house on the outskirts of San Antonio, surrounded by 5 other individuals who had answered similar calls. There was Dr. Marcus Webb, a physician from Boston who had documented cases of spontaneous healing. Professor Elena Vasquez, a scholar from Mexico City who had photographed apparitions in ancient ruins. James Whitmore, a former Union Army officer who had witnessed impossible events during the war that no official report would ever acknowledge. Each had a story. Each carried the burden of knowledge that couldn't be shared with the wider world. The question, Miss Aldrich said, as the group settled around a large table, is not whether these phenomena exist. We all have proof that they do. The question is what we do with that knowledge. Webb spoke first. I've been documenting miraculous healings for 8 years. I have medical records, witness testimonies, photographic evidence. But if I publish any of it, I'll be stripped of my medical license and branded a charlatan. The same dilemma faces us all, Professor Vasquez added. The world demands proof of the extraordinary, but when we provide it, we are dismissed as frauds or madmen. Samuel found himself speaking without conscious decision. I have photographs of 7 Comanche warriors racing on horses that never touched the ground. The images are technically perfect, the witnesses reliable, the evidence undeniable. But I've told no one, because I know what would happen if I did. Miss Aldrich nodded approvingly. And that wisdom is exactly why you belong with us. The custodians have been preserving such evidence for over a century, waiting for a time when humanity might be ready to accept that the universe contains mysteries beyond our current understanding. She gestured to a large trunk that sat in the corner of the room. In there are hundreds of photographs, documents, and artifacts that prove the existence of phenomena that challenge everything the scientific establishment believes. We are not hiding this evidence to suppress the truth. We are preserving it until the world is ready to receive it without destroying it. James Whitmore leaned forward. But how do we know when that time will come? We don't, Miss Aldrich admitted. But we have faith that it will. And when it does, the evidence will be there, carefully preserved and documented, ready to expand human understanding, rather than being dismissed as trickery or delusion. Samuel spent the rest of the evening listening to stories that mirrored his own experience. Ordinary people who had witnessed extraordinary events and found themselves isolated by the burden of that knowledge. By the time the meeting ended, he had made his decision. 2 days later, Samuel carefully removed the photographs from their hiding place and wrapped them in the special preservation materials that Miss Aldrich had provided. Along with them, he included a detailed written account of everything he had witnessed, from the initial approach of the riders to the complete absence of tracks after their passage. The package was sealed and labeled with a code number that would allow future custodians to identify its contents without revealing them to unauthorized eyes. Samuel watched as Miss Aldrich placed it in a specially designed case that would protect the photographs for decades, possibly centuries. Your secret is safe, she told him, and when the world is ready, your evidence will help prove that there was once magic in this land that defied every law of physics and logic. As Samuel returned to his regular work, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He was no longer alone with his impossible knowledge. Somewhere, in a secure repository maintained by the custodians, his photographs would wait for a future generation that might be wise enough to accept the evidence of wonders, without destroying the wonder itself. But even as he found peace with his decision, Samuel couldn't help but wonder if that future would ever come, or if the mysteries he had witnessed were destined to remain forever hidden, protected by the very secrecy that preserved them. As autumn settled over Texas in 1860, Samuel Hartwell tried to return to his normal life, but the weight of his secret continued to influence everything he did. The photographs he had entrusted to the custodians were safely hidden away, but the memory of what he had witnessed remained vivid and troubling. His regular photography work, portraits of prominent San Antonio families, documentation of new buildings and civic improvements, felt hollow and meaningless compared to the extraordinary images he had captured on the plains. Samuel found himself going through the motions of his profession while his mind wandered constantly to that impossible afternoon when 7 horses had galloped through empty air. The change in his demeanor did not go unnoticed. His assistant, Tommy Fletcher, grew increasingly concerned about his employer's distracted behavior and frequent long silences. "Mr. Hartwell," Tommy said one morning as Samuel stared blankly at a portrait setup he had been arranging for over an hour, "are you feeling poorly? You ain't been yourself since you got back from that Indian expedition." Samuel forced himself to focus on the young man's worried face. "I'm fine, Tommy. Just tired, I suppose." But he wasn't fine, and they both knew it. Samuel had begun to question everything he thought he understood about the world. If horses could run on air, what other impossibilities might be hiding in plain sight? How many other photographers had captured evidence of the extraordinary only to hide it away or destroy it rather than face ridicule? These questions tormented him through sleepless nights and distracted days. Samuel found himself studying every photograph he had ever taken, looking for subtle signs of the impossible that he might have missed or dismissed. He began to see potential mysteries everywhere, shadows that fell at wrong angles, reflections that didn't quite match their sources, expressions on faces that seemed to suggest knowledge of things beyond normal human experience. The obsession was consuming him, and Samuel knew it, but he couldn't stop himself from searching for evidence that the world contained more wonders than anyone dared to acknowledge. It was during this period of mounting obsession that Samuel received disturbing news from Jake Morrison. The guide appeared at his studio one cold November morning, his weathered face grim with concern. "Sam," Jake said without preamble, "we got problems. Big problems." Samuel set down the camera lens he had been cleaning and gave Jake his full attention. "What kind of problems?" "The kind that come from poking around in things that are supposed to stay hidden," Jake replied. "Word's gotten out about our little expedition. Not the details, mind you, but enough to get the wrong kind of people interested." Jake explained that rumors had begun circulating among certain government officials and military personnel about a photographer who had witnessed unusual activities among the Comanche. The stories were vague and contradictory, but they all centered on the idea that Samuel had documented something of potential military or strategic value. "They think you might have photographed new weapons or tactics," Jake continued, "or maybe evidence of supernatural powers that could be studied and replicated. Either way, there are people in Washington who want to see what you captured out there." Samuel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather. "But I reported that the expedition was unsuccessful." He told Harper's Weekly that no sable photographs were obtained. "Doesn't matter," Jake said grimly. "Once these government types get an idea in their heads, they don't let go easy. And with the country heading toward war, they're especially interested in anything that might give them an advantage." The implications of Jake's warning became clear over the following weeks. Samuel began to notice strangers watching his studio from across the street. His mail was delivered later than usual, and some envelopes showed signs of having been opened and resealed. Clients mentioned that men had been asking questions about Samuel's recent work and his expedition to photograph the Comanche. The pressure was subtle but constant, and Samuel realized that his decision to hide the photographs had been even wiser than he had initially thought. If government agents were this interested in rumors of unusual Comanche activities, what would they do if they discovered actual photographic evidence of horses that could defy gravity? Samuel's anxiety reached a breaking point when two men in dark suits appeared at his studio one afternoon, claiming to represent a Department of the Interior. They were polite but insistent, asking detailed questions about his time with the Comanche and requesting to examine all photographs taken during the expedition. "Hartwell," said the taller of the two men, who had introduced himself as Kent Morrison, "no relation to Jake. We understand that your official report indicated technical difficulties prevented successful photography. However, we have reason to believe that you may have obtained some images that could be of interest to the government." Samuel forced himself to remain calm. "Gentlemen, I assure you that my report was accurate. The extreme heat and difficult conditions resulted in complete failure of my photographic equipment. I returned with nothing usable." The second agent, a thin man with cold eyes, stepped forward. "Miss Hartwell, we're prepared to offer substantial compensation for any photographs that might have survived, regardless of their technical quality. The government has ways of enhancing images that might seem unusable to civilian eyes." "I'm afraid you've made a wasted trip," Samuel replied firmly. "There are no photographs to enhance." The agents exchanged glances, and Samuel could see that they didn't believe him. After a few more minutes of polite, but increasingly threatening questions, they left, but not before Agent Morrison handed Samuel a card. "If you remember anything that might be helpful to your government, Mr. Hartwell, please don't hesitate to contact us. We would hate for any misunderstandings to arise regarding your patriotic duty." That evening, Samuel sat in his dark room, staring at the false wall that had once hidden the most extraordinary photographs of his career. He was grateful beyond measure that Miss Aldrich and the custodians had taken them away, but he was also terrified by the realization of how close he had come to disaster. If the government agents had discovered the photographs, what would have happened? Would they have tried to force him to reveal the location of the Comanche band? Would they have demanded that he return to the plains to document more supernatural activities? Would they have tried to weaponize whatever forces had allowed those horses to run on air? The thought made Samuel physically ill. The magic he had witnessed had been pure and beautiful, a glimpse into mysteries that transcended human understanding. To see it reduced to a military asset or a tool of conquest would have been a desecration beyond imagining. Samuel wrote a careful letter to Miss Aldrich, using the coded language she had taught him, informing her of the government interest in his expedition. A reply came within a week, equally coded but reassuring. The custodians had dealt with such situations before, and they had ways of protecting their members and their secrets. But the experience had changed Samuel profoundly. He realized that the burden of extraordinary knowledge was not just personal, it was dangerous. The world was not merely unprepared for evidence of the impossible, it was actively hostile to those in power would seek to control and exploit any phenomenon that challenged their understanding of reality. As winter deepened over Texas, Samuel made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would never again seek out the extraordinary. He would focus on ordinary photography, ordinary subjects, ordinary mysteries that could be safely shared with the world. But late at night, when the wind howled across the plains and the stars seemed to pulse with otherworldly light, Samuel would remember the sight of 7 horses galloping through empty air, their hooves striking at nothing, their riders' faces fierce with the joy of participating in something beyond the boundaries of the possible. And he would be grateful that somewhere, hidden away in the secret archives of the custodians, the evidence of that impossible afternoon was preserved, waiting for a future when humanity might be wise enough to encounter wonder without destroying it. The horses that left no tracks had taught Samuel that some mysteries were too precious to expose to a world that would only seek to capture, control, and corrupt him. The price of wonder, he had learned, was eternal vigilance in protecting it from those who would reduce magic to mere mechanism. The winter of 1861 brought more than cold winds to Texas. As the nation teetered on the brink of civil war, Samuel Hardwell found himself caught between the growing tensions of a divided country and the persistent interest of government agents in his supposed Comanche photographs. The pressure had not diminished since the visit from the Department of Interior agents. If anything, it had intensified. Samuel noticed that his studio was under almost constant surveillance, with different men taking shifts to watch his comings and goings. His mail was clearly being intercepted and examined, and several of his regular clients had mentioned being questioned about his work and character. The situation became even more complicated when Texas voted to secede from the Union in February. Overnight, the federal agents who had been pressuring Samuel became representatives of a foreign government, while new Confederate officials began their own investigations into anything that might provide military advantages in the coming conflict. Samuel found himself in the impossible position of being suspected by both sides of hiding valuable intelligence. The Union agents believed he possessed evidence of supernatural Comanche abilities that could be studied and replicated. The Confederate officials, meanwhile, suspected him of being a Union spy who had used his photography expedition as cover for gathering intelligence about Texas defenses and Indian alliance. The truth that he had indeed captured impossible images, but had hidden them away to protect their mystery from exploitation, was something he could share with no one in authority. It was during this tense period that Samuel received an unexpected visitor who would change his understanding of the situation entirely. Jake Morrison appeared at his studio one evening, after closing, but he was not alone. With him was an elderly Comanche man whose presence seemed to fill the small space with an almost tangible sense of power and wisdom. Sam, Jake said quietly, I'd like you to meet Joseph Running Bear, the chief's grandfather. He's the one who really understands what happened during that race. The old man studied Samael with eyes that seemed to see far more than the physical world around them. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear, with an accent that spoke of a lifetime spent bridging very different cultures. You are the one who captured the spirit horses with his magic box, Joseph Running Bear said. It was not a question. Samuel nodded, unsure how to respond to such a direct acknowledgement of what he had witnessed. The old man smiled, and Samuel was surprised to see warmth and approval in his expression. Good, the spirits chose well. They knew you would protect their secret. I don't understand, Samuel said. How did you know I would hide the photographs? Joseph Running Bear moved to the window and gazed out at the darkening sky. The spirit horses have run that race for 7 generations of my people. Always there have been those who witnessed it, white men, Mexican soldiers, other tribes, but none before you had the magic to capture their image. It turned back to Samuel, his ancient face grave. The spirits knew that the time was coming when such magic would be dangerous. They knew that the white man's world would try to steal their power and use it for war. So they chose you to be their guardian. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Joseph, tell him about the others. The old man nodded slowly. There have been 3 attempts by soldiers to capture the spirit horses. Each time, the horses appeared as ordinary animals, leaving tracks, making noise, running as any horse would run. The magic only reveals itself to those who will protect it. Samuel felt a chill of understanding. You're saying that the horses chose to show me their true nature? The spirits read your heart before you even arrived, Joseph Running Bear confirmed. They saw that you were a man who understood the difference between documenting truth and exploiting it. They trusted you with their secret. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Samoyed assumed that he had simply been lucky enough to witness an extraordinary phenomenon. Now he learned that the phenomenon had deliberately revealed itself to him, trusting in his character to protect it from those who would misuse it. But why are you telling me this now? Samoyed. Joseph Running Bear's expression grew troubled. Because the time of hiding is ending. The war that comes will bring many changes to this land. My people will be scattered, the old ways will be forgotten, and the spirit horses may not return when the 7 years pass again. He reached into a leather pouch and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft skin. This is for you, guardian of the spirit horses. It will help you know when the secret is in danger and when it is safe to share. Samuel Yesirobaki then found himself holding a piece of polished stone that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The moment his fingers touched it, he felt a strange sensation, as if he had suddenly become aware of currents of energy flowing through the world around him. What is it? He whispered. A fragment of the stone that stands at the center of the spirit world. Joseph Running Bear replied. It will grow warm when those with evil intentions seek the secret you guard. It will grow cold when the time comes to reveal the truth. Over the following weeks, Samuel discovered that the stone was indeed sensitive to the intentions of those around him. It grew uncomfortably warm whenever the government agents appeared in his vicinity, and it remained cool and pleasant when he was with people he trusted. More importantly, the stone seemed to give him insight into the larger forces at work around him. Samuel began to understand that his encounter with the spirit horses was part of a much larger pattern of supernatural phenomena that existed throughout the American frontier. The custodians, he realized, were not just preserving isolated incidents of the impossible. They were documenting an entire hidden layer of reality that coexisted with the mundane world. As the Civil War erupted and Texas descended into chaos, Samuel used the stone's guidance to navigate the increasingly dangerous waters of divided loyalties and competing interests. When Confederate officials demanded to search his studio, the stone's warmth warned him to hide his most sensitive materials. When Union sympathizers approached him with offers of protection in exchange for information, the Stone's heat told him to decline their assistance. But the most significant moment came in the summer of 1961, when a young Confederate officer arrived at Samuel's studio with a proposition that chilled him to the bone. "Hartwell," the officer, "I represent certain interests in Richmond who have heard rumors about your expedition among the Comanche. We understand that you may have witnessed unusual capabilities that could be of value to the Confederate cause." The stone in Samuel's pocket grew so hot that he could barely keep from crying out. This was exactly the kind of exploitation that Joseph Running Bear had warned him about. "I'm afraid those rumors are greatly exaggerated," Samuel replied carefully. "My expedition was largely unsuccessful." The officer smiled coldly. "Mr. Hartwell, we are prepared to offer you a commission in the Confederate Army and substantial financial compensation if you can help us understand how the Comanche achieved their superintellectual advantages in warfare." Samuel realized that the war had created exactly the conditions that the spirit horses had feared. Desperate for any advantage, both sides were now actively seeking to weaponize the supernatural phenomena that existed on the earth. "I'm sorry, but I have nothing to offer you," Samuel said firmly. The officer's expression hardened. "Mr. Hartwell, I hope you understand that in times of war, patriotic duty sometimes requires sacrifices. It would be unfortunate if your reluctant survey of the Confederacy were to be interpreted as disloyalty." Was that night, as Samuel sat in his dark room with the warm stone in his hand, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. The war had made it too dangerous to remain in Texas with his secret knowledge. It would have to leave, to find a place where he could wait out the conflict and protect the mystery of the spirit horses until the world was ready to receive it. Within a week, Samuel had quietly closed his studio and departed to San Antonio, carrying only his essential equipment and the precious stone that connected him to the supernatural world he had sworn to protect. He left behind a note for Jake Morrison, thanking him for his guidance and promising to return when the danger had passed. As his stagecoach rolled north toward Kansas, Samuel looked back at the Texas plains where he had witnessed the impossible. Somewhere out there, the spirit horses waited for their next 7-year cycle, trusting that their secret would remain safe until humanity was wise enough to encounter wonder without destroying it. The gathering storm of war had forced Samuel to become a guardian in exile, but his commitment to protecting the mystery remained absolute. The horses that left no tracks had chosen their protector well, and he would not fail them, no matter what the cost. 25 years had passed since Samuel Hartwell witnessed the impossible race on the Texas plains. The Civil War had ended, the frontier had been largely tamed, and the age of photography had advanced far beyond the cumbersome equipment Samuel had carried on that fateful expedition. Now 67 years old and living quietly in a small town in Colorado, Samuel had built a modest but successful photography business documenting the mining boom and the steady stream of settlers who continued to push westward. His hair had gone completely white. His hands showed the tremor of age, but his eyes remained sharp, and his memory of that extraordinary afternoon remained as vivid as ever. The stone that Joseph Running Bear had given him still rested in his pocket, worn smooth by decades of handling. It guided him through the dangerous years of the war, warning him when to hide and when to move, when to trust and when to remain silent. Now in the relative peace of the 1800s, it remained mostly cool and calm, but Samuel sensed that change was coming. The world had indeed evolved since we entered the sense. The Transcontinental Railroad had connected the coasts. Telegraph lines carried messages across vast distances in minutes, and electric lights were beginning to illuminate the streets of major cities. Science and technology were advancing at an unprecedented pace, and the old mysteries of the frontier seemed increasingly out of place in this new age of reason and progress. It was on a crisp autumn morning in 1875 that Samuel received a letter that would force him to confront the legacy of his secret knowledge. The envelope bore the familiar seal of the custodians of the extraordinary, and the letter inside was signed by Miss Catherine Aldrich, though she was now addressed as Director Aldrich. Dear Mr. Hartwell, I hope this letter finds you in good health. It has been many years since we last corresponded, but the time has come to discuss the future of the materials you entrusted to our care. The world is changing rapidly, and we believe it may soon be ready to receive evidence of the extraordinary phenomena we have been preserving. The scientific community is beginning to acknowledge the existence of forces and energies that were previously dismissed as impossible. Researchers are investigating telepathy, psychic phenomena, and other manifestations of what they term psychical research. We would like to arrange a meeting to discuss the possibility of gradually revealing some of our archived materials to selected members of the scientific community. Your photographs of the Comanche spirit horses would be among the first items we would consider for disclosure. Please let me know if you would be willing to participate in such a revelation. Respectfully yours, Catherine Aldrich, Director Custodians of the Extraordinary. Samuel read the letter 3 times, his weathered hands trembling slightly. The stone in his pocket remained cool, suggesting that Director Aldrich's intentions were pure. But the prospect of finally revealing his secret after 25 years of silence filled him with both excitement and terror. That evening, Samuel sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and purple. He thought about the young photographer he had been in Nia de 60, so eager to document the world and share his discoveries with anyone who would look. That man would have leaped at the chance to finally reveal his extraordinary photographs. But 25 years of carrying the secret had changed Samuel profoundly. He had learned that some truths were too precious to expose to a world that might not understand their value. He had seen how the Civil War had turned even the most innocent discoveries into potential weapons, and he had witnessed the way that wonder could be corrupted by those who sought to exploit it. Samuel spent the next week composing his reply to Director Aldrich. When he finally mailed the letter, it contained a proposal that surprised even him. Dear Director Aldrich, thank you for your letter and for the careful preservation of the materials I entrusted to your organization. I have given considerable thought to your proposal, and I believe the time may indeed be approaching when the world could benefit from evidence of the extraordinary. However, I would like to suggest a different approach. Rather than revealing the photographs themselves, I propose that we begin by sharing the story, a carefully crafted account that presents the events as a work of fiction based on frontier legends. This would allow the ideas to enter the public consciousness gradually, preparing people for the eventual revelation of the photographic evidence. I have begun writing such an account, framing it as a tale told by an old photographer about the mysteries he encountered on the frontier. If the story is well received and generates thoughtful discussion rather than sensationalism, we could then consider revealing the actual photographs as recently discovered evidence that supports the fictional account. This approach would protect the mystery while slowly expanding the boundaries of what people are willing to accept as possible. I await your thoughts on this proposal. Sincerely, Samuel Hartwell. Director Aldrich's response was enthusiastic. The custodians had been struggling with the same dilemma for decades: how to reveal extraordinary truths without destroying their essential mystery. Samuel's proposal offered a way to test the waters of public acceptance while maintaining the option to retreat if the response was hostile or exploitative. Over the following months, Samuel worked on his account of the spirit horses, crafting it as a story that could be read as either fiction or carefully disguised truth. He drew on his decades of experience as a photographer to create vivid, believable descriptions of the technical aspects of capturing such images, while weaving in enough authentic details about Comanche culture and frontier life to give the story weight and credibility. The stone in his pocket remained cool throughout the writing process, confirming that his approach was sound. When he finally completed the manuscript, Samuel felt a sense of completion that he had not experienced since that day in Etosensinta when he had first witnessed the impossible. The story was published in 1886 in a collection of frontier tales, presented as fiction but with enough realistic detail to make readers wonder if it might be based on actual events. The response was exactly what Samuel had hoped for: thoughtful discussion about the nature of reality and the possibility that the frontier had contained mysteries that were now lost forever. Some readers dismissed it as pure fantasy, but others found themselves intrigued by the possibility that such phenomena might have existed. A few even wrote to the publisher asking if the photographer in the story was based on a real person and whether any evidence of the spirit horses might still exist. Samuel watched the public reaction carefully, guided by the stone's responses to various inquiries and proposals. When serious researchers approached the topic with respect and genuine scientific curiosity, the stone remained cool. When sensationalists or those with exploitative intentions showed interests, it grew warm in warning. As the years passed, Samuel gradually revealed more details through additional stories and carefully placed interviews with frontier historians. He never claimed that the events were real, but he provided enough authentic detail to keep the possibility alive in the public imagination. In 1895, 35 years after the original event, Samuel finally felt that the time was right for the ultimate revelation. The scientific community had become more open to investigating unusual phenomena, and the frontier period was now far enough in the past to be viewed with romantic nostalgia rather than immediate practical interest. Working with the custodians, Samuel arranged for the discovery of his original photographs in a trunk of frontier memorabilia donated to a university archive. The images were presented as historical curiosities, authentic photographs that capture either an extraordinary event or an elaborate hoax from the frontier period. The photographs generated exactly the kind of thoughtful debate that Samuel had hoped for. Scientists studied them for signs of manipulation and found none. Historians researched the background and confirmed the authenticity of the equipment, the period, and the cultural context. Skeptics proposed various explanations for the apparent levitation, while believers argued that the images provided evidence of phenomena that mainstream science had yet to acknowledge. But most importantly, the photographs were received with wonder rather than exploitation. They became symbols of the mystery and magic that had once existed on the American frontier, reminders that the world contained possibilities beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. Samuel lived to see his photographs displayed in museums and discussed in academic journals. He watched as they inspired artists, writers, and researchers to explore the boundaries between the possible and impossible. He saw them become part of the cultural conversation about the nature of reality and the importance of preserving mystery in an increasingly mechanized world. When Samuel Hartwell died peacefully in his sleep in Monteoro, at the age of 74, he was buried with the stone that Joseph Running Bear had given him so many years before. His obituary mentioned his contributions to frontier photography, but made no reference to his most extraordinary work. The photographs of the horses that left the no tracks continue to inspire and mystify viewers for generations to come. They became symbols of a time when the American frontier contained wonders that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. And somewhere on the Texas plain, according to those who still remember the old stories, the spirit horses continue their 7-year cycle, running on air itself, waiting for the next guardian, who will be worthy of witnessing their impossible race and wise enough to protect its mystery from a world that still struggles to distinguish between wonder and exploitation. The legacy of Samuel Hartwell's photographs was not just the evidence they provided of the extraordinary, but the lesson they taught about the responsibility that comes with witnessing the impossible. Some truths, they suggested, are too precious to expose carelessly to a world that might not understand their value. The horses that left no tracks had chosen their guardian well, and through his careful stewardship of their secret, Samuel had ensured that their mystery would endure, inspiring future generations to believe that the universe still contained wonders beyond the boundaries of human understanding.